Welcome back to The Explainer. We are finishing up with our guests here on the state of the economy. I want to get to some of your questions and comments right now as we close our discussion. And the first question here comes from Jam Ngonga, if we can take a look at that on your screens. The first one is talking about, well, I would have to look over to that screen over there at the back to be able to read that question. Perhaps if you can have it on the screens, please. That question goes to Kwame Owino, economist with the Institute for Economic Affairs, and it's talking about the comparison. Thank you, there we are. Kindly ask the guest to compare the inflation rate in Kenya with global and regional rates. Kwame? Okay,
yeah. So let's remember that most high-income countries, the US and OECD countries US and many European countries tend to have very, very low inflation, of course, with the exception of the burst that happened after COVID, but generally have low inflation. So the US inflation is somewhere between 2 and 3%, which is where Kenya is today. But those tend to be very tightly controlled. They have broader markets, and that a safe inflation level for a country of Kenya's income usually is between 4 and 8%. So the target, the inflation targets that have been established for the central bank are actually reasonable, even compared to countries in Kenya's income. In the region, the country with the highest is Burundi at 14%. But in Africa, of course, Sudan is more than 100. Yeah. There's a bad situation. Yeah. South Africa is about 4%, and Tanzania is at about 5%. So Kenya's right now is the lowest even within East Africa. What is it that Kenya is chasing? So, yeah. Are those comparisons helpful, and in what way? Like, if you want to benchmark regionally and internationally, if you want to do that, how would you do that, and based on what? Good. So what we call them the metropoles, the big global economies. So we're talking here Germany, we're talking about the US. Think of inflation at 4 or 5% as a disaster. But you must compare inflation together with growth. So those countries tend to grow at 2-3%, really, really great. In Kenya, the safest area tends to be between 4 and 8. So Kenya's is already okay. In fact, too tight on the lower side. Too loose on the lower side. So inflation on its own really doesn't tell you much, but it tells you how does inflation surface with growth. And most countries in Kenya's income level, but also best peer countries, usually have inflation between the 4 to 8% band. Okay. So to chase what Kenya is chasing at 2%, and you remember the president mentioned a couple of weeks back that we are chasing inflation at 3%, it's not even wise until Kenya has an income level that is double to even try to bring it below 5. That is based on just the empirical part. And it will take us to another doubling, so 4 times Kenya's income level, above $15,000, before you can start talking of managing inflation at 3% and below as the tight bar. Leave alone the fact that the president said we are seeking 3%, and so this seems to be working for where his target is. Remember, again, the Constitution does not allow anybody to direct the central bank on how to manage monetary policy. Right. So these guys are getting a bit too liberal with their thinking and their speaking. And then on the other side, Mr. Mbadi says that we are trying to bring interest rates down so that people can bubble. So actually, those are pulling on different sides. So these guys need to go to a room and give us a coherent message. Okay. But the point is, very few countries at our income level should chase inflation at 2%. That's too tight. It creates the kind of constraints that we've talked about, and at the same time prevents business growth, which is important for not just growth on its own, but also for employment and obviously for people's incomes. Okay, let's take another quick comment here from Raymond Chiaji, who says the 2.7% inflation rate has no effect on litmus paper. With the prices still high, the prices of commodities will never go down. Let's take a look at another comment from Hoodie. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Inflation rates being lower doesn't mean the prices will go lower. They just raise slower.
Lower inflation doesn't add money to my pockets. It's just draining it slower than before. The economy is in shambles. Simple. Hoodie, I think, saying exactly what you were saying here, Kwame. Here's another one. Insider 92 says, if people are becoming more cautious about spending due to rising taxes and levies, how much longer can the economy sustain this tension before it begins to feel the strain? Maybe it's a rhetorical question. We'll come and answer that in a moment. But let's get this one. Andrew Gashanja says, low inflation means there's less money in circulation. Low inflation should induce low prices. If there's less money in the economy but high prices for the average citizen, then this means that some few persons are hoarding most of the money. I'd like us to just go back to that initial question about how much longer can we go with the situation we're at. Rose, Solomon, any of you can take that. In private sector, how much longer can we continue this way?
Not a lot longer, because as we've said, what we're actually seeing is businesses are not planning to invest. And as we said, when you're planning to invest, you're either opening a new shop, you're opening a new factory, a new production line, which means that you have more products to sell and you're employing more people and you're buying more product. So as if 70% of businessmen are saying they're not planning to invest, that's not a good thing for the economy. If 50% are saying that they anticipate they're going to decrease their payroll one way or the other, either they'll lay off or there'll be no increases or anything of that sort. That is also not good. So you find that it's really not something that can be sustained for long before then the economy, as we've seen, it really is a chicken and egg. If business is not growing, then it also means that there's low consumer demand. There's low confidence in the economy, and also means that the taxes that the government is collecting are also getting lower, based on our GDP tax base as you calculate that. So it's really not something that is very sustainable. The way I look at it is that the one thing that we're all not talking about is that we really must, I always say it, we must cut our coat according to our cloth. If our revenues that we can collect is about 2.4 trillion last year, maybe, I don't know what the projection for this year is, then really our budget cannot be 4 trillion, right? We have to live within our means. And if we live within our means, then we find that we're able to redirect, the same thing Kwame was saying, we're able to redirect some of these taxes from government expenditure and to bring them to businesses. So businesses have more credit. You reduce some of the, some have more credit to expand, because then banks are not taking all their money to the Treasury or to CBK. They're actually willing. I always think back to the time of Kibaki. Banks were at the corners of every single street lending money, right? And people took that money and they expanded their businesses and they employed more people and they went and bought product and they paid taxes, right? We have to think, how do we get back to that place where we are really allowing the private sector and business to actually expand and grow, so that we can, eventually that will give us more taxes, will bring us more higher employment, will increase consumer demand. And it's just a cyclical.
And one of the things, you know, as we get your closing thoughts as well, that prevents businesses from, you know, investing more is the fact that you are owed money. There's pending bills. There is that committee, by the way, that was put together, you know, to audit. And surely in this country, every time there's the issue of pending bills, both at national and county, one of the things you hear is we are conducting an audit of you know, the monies that people are claiming we owe them. So there's pending bills that are owed by government. I mean, in the private sector, private hospitals, there's that 30 billion odd that is owed by NHIF, now defunct, now under Shah, which today, whose CEO stands suspended today for professional misconduct, apparently. But what does that do for you? How much money is owed to private sector? And when this money is out there, what does that mean for you?
Well, I think for businesses, it has a huge impact. For example, I did see that I think the PS for the Ministry of Health said they have committed that they'll pay that money.
Yeah.
But it has a huge impact. If you're a small hospital, you have to buy medicines, you have to buy medical, you have to pay salaries to doctors and nurses and other administrators who are running, your premises. And if you don't have that money, if it's sitting at NHIF, then that is a huge problem. So I know that a lot of smaller hospitals are struggling. A lot of businesses are also struggling similarly. Either they supplied government or government-related bodies at some point in time, and they've not been paid. I know there is a commitment that these payments will be made, but really, even given our financial situation, there is really no timeline as to when will these payments be made. So those are part of the challenges in terms of that cash that needs to be circulating within the economy.
Yeah. Then there was also a proposal that they would float a bond for pending bills.
That's not by itself not a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you owe people money and your cash flow is would not support it at this time, that's why a bond would be. So it's a specific one for a bond. If you do a specific one for infrastructure, why not?
Yeah.
So you do a specific one for a bond. You make sure you've audited and everybody who's getting paid is valid cash.
Right, yeah.
And then you simply pay so that you can, because the pending bills question has been with us for nearly a generation now, because it started.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So help me understand. You would come borrow from me to pay me what you owe me.
No. What you say
that's sort of what it sounds like.
Well, you could do it two ways.
Okay.
You can convert the liability to a bond by saying government owes you this amount, so you convert it. Or you'd go to the market and say, what's the cheapest money we can get? And you say, we are borrowing money for, say, 30 years or whatever amount of duration. Right now, the total, based on the budget review and outlook paper, is about 600 billion.
Yeah.
So 600 billion is a lot, but you can borrow it in phases depending on where the money is, right?
Yeah.
And then you simply pay. So you say every 6 months or so, we will clear this part of it, and then proceed on that way, and say within 5 years, clear the entire, retire the entire amount.
Okay.
And I think that's more useful than actually having an audit every 3 years.
Yeah.
Each.
Yeah, which seems to just be kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, and I think the government just did the same thing for the subsidies that was being given to the petroleum companies. So just trying to manage cash flow, then they just took that direction. But just dovetailing to the issue of pending bills, when you just look at the budget outlook paper, out of that 600 billion, majority of it goes to people in development projects and contractors. So, and this really is a critical sector within the economy.
Yeah.
If people are constructing, then it creates more opportunities.
Right.
Just speaking to Rose's point around money circulation, it's very important for tax, because if I have the money, then I'm in a position to pay the taxes, and that money naturally will increase. But longer term, I think then the conversation around tax-based expansion becomes very important, just ensuring that each and every person contributes their fair share of taxes, so that you don't put an unnecessary strain on
the salary, because that's where they keep going.
I actually have a different view about that.
Okay.
Just right early this year, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics established the poverty assessment report for 2022, which is the latest. And it tells you that 39% of Kenyans, 39% of the 52 million Kenyans live below the poverty line. And sometimes I ask, look, we must pay to Caesar what is Caesar's. But sometimes I think Caesar doesn't know who his citizens are. I get the impression that sometimes we think there's more money in this.
In the informal sector?
Yes, than there is. Because if you look at these numbers that are showing all that is falling, revenues, not only revenues, rather, real incomes are falling, and that. Maybe there isn't. I would rather government simply closed existing loopholes.
Such as?
Well, for the refunds, I think the refund system is itself very, very mixed up. Simply make sure that if somebody owes money, as was stated last year, you make sure that the arrears are paid with it. Because there's no reason for us to say that the Revenue Service has collected 600 billion, for instance, of which 60 billion is actually owed back, in terms of payment. Right. The real collection is actually 540. Yeah. And when we leave off the 540. But the point I was trying to make, not to distract us, the point I was trying to make is close loopholes. There's a belief that we need to expand the tax base. And we've been speaking about that for like 15, 20 years. Yeah. Maybe there's no tax base. Remember, 50% of Kenyans are below the age of 19. And then the average person usually leaves home about 26, 27 because they haven't found a job and so they live with mom and dad. You could go for consumption taxes, I agree, that we could, but maybe there's not too many other jobs out there and people who are hiding a lot of money. I'm not too sure there is. And we might just have to contend with that.
How can we establish what sort of money exists in the informal sector?
Yes.
Because, we seem to say there's a lot that's happening there. There's businesses.
You look at the M-Pesa movement.
And we've also seen... But then, doesn't that then tie in with what KRA is now, attempting to do, which is verify phone numbers?
But the point for me is they're not going to get that money. You saw right now, money transfer services went down. Yeah. I'm saying my grandmother receiving two transfers from myself and a sister somewhere every 3 months or every month in itself does not show, that not by itself suggests that she actually has a regular income. It's the same. Dependency rates are very, very high. So the point is not for taxes to be collected. The point is we need to be realistic about how an economy where the average income is about 300,000 shillings per person per year, how much of that money, of which households spend 60%, some households in this country spend 60% of their money buying food, how much money is actually available for tax collection. And if we are smart with ourselves and accept that we are a poor country, you're collecting taxes from people who are mostly poor, then maybe Kenyans are not as dishonest as we are suggesting. Because this thing of expanding the tax bill we've always been scolded that you have money and you're hiding it somewhere. Most of Kenya is rural. Where are these people hiding this cash? I don't think it's as much. Are there tax holds to be covered? There is. Are there professionals who are not paying the taxes that is due? There is. But to suggest that there's a whole horde of people out there hiding taxes from the Revenue Service, in my view, is not going to be, rather, it's not something that is borne by the evidence. Especially if you look at our social economic indicators, it's not that much.
All right. Closing comments now. I'll take those as your final words. Rose, in about 2 minutes or less. And then you, Solomon. Rose, first.
I think for me, I just come back to the discussion we've had. You have to allow business to grow. If you don't create an environment that's conducive to business growth, then we ask ourselves, how far can we sustain this? And we've said, we've talked about those issues about business growth. We've talked about predictability of taxes. We've talked about access to credit and so forth. So those become really and to really reduce some of the taxes that are reducing market sentiment in terms of, do I want to invest more? Do I want to do this more? If we can actually balance that, and of course it's really a balancing act. The government has to balance that, which also means that the government has to look at its own expenditure and say how much, given that we know what our taxes, what we can raise in revenues, then we really must cap what we must spend, so that we can then allocate some of these resources to go to business people, so that business people can grow and can employ more people. And these more people, when they get employed, you get a salary, you go home and you spend on that and you pay taxes to the government. And that is really the only way we're going to grow this economy.
Okay, thank you, Rose. Solomon?
Thank you, Yvonne. So for me, I think the most important thing for me really is just have that fiscal consolidation, have money in circulation so that everyone within the economy benefits.
Good one. All right. That's a good way to end it. Solomon Kihanga, thank you. Rose Mara and Kwame Owino on a conversation about the state of the economy and all of those wonderful metrics that are put on paper and that we report about here constantly, but what that really means for your pocket, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Explainer for that conversation. We want to finish up the program now with the day's sports news.